All right, I want to welcome everybody to another episode of the Shadows Podcast. I am your host, Trip Bodenheimer, and I am very excited today to be joined by Adam Boubede. He is a Chief Master Sergeant in the United States Air Force. He is a co-author, one of the co-authors of the Firestarters book project. He's actually the third one that we've had here on the Shadows. And I think what I'm most envious of is he's in Germany right now, and I'm in Alabama. Sir, welcome to the Shadows Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I'm super excited. I've been looking forward to doing this with you for a while. I know we had a couple talks, a couple miscues while I was actually in Alabama right next door to you. And somehow we couldn't make this work out. But here we are now, almost a full world apart and making it happen.
Yeah, we tried to do a Zaxby's lunch and we couldn't. And we were literally a block away from each other and we couldn't.
Failure.
I know. How's everything in Germany?
Going a lot better now. The vaccines have really started coming in. So things are opening back up. When I first got here in December of 20, we were in complete lockdown. Restaurants are closed. So everything you ever hear is like, you want to go to Germany because of X, whether it's the food, the history, going to other countries, travel, it's all locked down. All right. So lots of restrictions, curfews, what have you, but that's all like lifting up, we're catching back up to kind of where the States are now.
Nice.
So it's really starting to get exciting.
What about Ryanair? Ryanair, are they still in business?
I'm not sure, actually.
Yeah, that was our thing, was hopping on a Ryanair flight and going somewhere. And I was like, there's no way they're going to survive COVID with all of this. But yeah, that's very envious of you. That was probably the best 6 years of my life, was being in Germany and traveling. It was like a fairy tale. So I'm definitely envious of you. But we're going to go ahead and get started here with some rapid fire questions before we get into your story. First one. What do you try to avoid at all costs?
Not being myself.
Ooh.
Like I don't want to portray myself as fake. I don't want to wear a mask. I really get on board with the authentic leadership. I feel like it's really the only way to carry yourself. And in all walks of life, not just in a professional manner. There's no more wasted time than to blow your energy on investing in someone who you're not.
To quote, or to actually paraphrase what Chief Gaylor said on his episode, was he's only good at being Chief Gaylor. He sucks at being everybody else.
Couldn't have said it better.
Who is the most interesting person you've ever met?
Man, that is a tough question.
We don't throw softballs here.
No. And I've met so many amazing people so the most interesting person, God, like everybody's got a story, and you dive into it so much that I'd hate to narrow it down and then leave somebody out.
Yeah.
You're killing me. This one's tough. I'm not sure I have an answer for you, man.
We'll come back to that one. Come back to that one.
Give me time.
How have you changed over the last 5 years?
In a lot of ways. 5 years. So in the last 5 years, I've learned to take steps back more and actually take the time to reflect on myself to help with my own personal growth. We spend a lot of time, I find, looking out, trying to grab on that next opportunity without taking time to truly learn the lessons from the things that were hard for us and that we might have had struggles with. And I think taking the time to deliberately step back and do that has been an immense boost to my own personal growth, for just not only just my professional career, but how I carry myself personally. And it's helped me take things in stride. I really think that it's been a huge boost to, I guess, what we would call emotional intelligence.
Okay. Other than the Firestarters book project, favorite book?
Favorite book? It might be Atomic Habits.
That's a really good one.
That was one that when I read it, those lessons carry. Those lessons carry. And I'd even add in pretty much any book. There's all kinds of authors out there that have amazing works. The Simon Sinek's of the world, Tim Ferriss. Like you could, the list is forever. But especially for our military listeners out there, any book by an enlisted author.
Yeah.
And to be honest, there's not enough of them. We've all got stories. We've got great experiences and insights. The ones that have been able to step up and put those thoughts to words and get those things published to where others can learn from them.
Yeah.
You're talking about, I'm going to translate, let's call it 30 years of experience, hard fought experience for you to digest in 100 pages.
Yeah. Yeah. It's free mentorship. James Clear, by the way, is the author of Atomic Habits. I got that book sitting right here. Very good book. All right. So I'm going to come back to it. One, you've had a little time to chew on it. Most interesting person you've ever met?
You know what? I'll go ahead and I'll give her this one. So, she introduced me to you, Shay Sparks.
I was thinking that. Yeah. Shay's a good one.
Let's go with Shay. So the energy she brings to the room, the ways that she networks with people, her enthusiasm, and man, it's addictive. Right. And the amount of things that she's involved with, and given her own story, which she's told on her own podcast, quite a few times.
Yeah.
The way she presents herself, with some vulnerability, and how much she's willing to risk for the benefit of others. It's been amazing knowing her, and I have her to thank for so many things. We talked about Firestarter's book project. That was with her. Me on this podcast with you, that was with her. Me being able to be on her podcast was with her. In all those stories that come from it.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. Shay's story now available, episode 8 of the Shadows podcast at theshadowspodcast.com. No, she actually was, when she was down in Montgomery doing her podcast tour just recently, we went to Panera over at East Chase, and Caleb Pearson, the host of Ignite podcast, we met her over there. She was supposed to record with Caleb, but I don't think Panera has ever had anybody in there for 4 hours. And we were so loud and laughing at so many random things to where all of our abs were hurting. We pretty much ran everybody from, I'm not exaggerating, nobody was sitting inside of Panera anymore, but the whole outside area was packed and it was humid as hell. But I think we were just that obnoxious group. But it was an amazing night. We were literally there. They were kicking us out with our green tea and baked potato soup, but it was fun. But Shay's amazing. All right. Well, now let's dive into your journey. So for our listeners out there, even this is always the interesting piece, especially for enlisted members, because a lot of times we have our bios floating around. People can pull those up. They can see all the amazing things we've done. But tell us about your journey prior to joining the military.
Right. So I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana. And for those of you, I say that because if I say anywhere in Louisiana, most people don't even know what a parish is. But for anybody who's from that area, I grew up in Jefferson Metairie Parish. It's about 20 minutes or so west of the city. But that's what I call home. I moved around a good bit. I'm the oldest of two. I got a brother who's 4 years younger than me. And I was always a little bit of an independent child, I think, growing up pretty adventurous. I was the one that, instantly let go of mom's hand and I'm running off doing whatever the hell I feel like. And I had a lot of family support for almost everything I wanted to do. I really have my entire family, extended family, mom, dad, cousins, uncles, aunts, grandparents to thank for everything they did to support me that, and as a kid, sometimes you don't appreciate that enough. And, you talked about like the last 5 years. That was another thing that, it kind of comes up is appreciating, knowing all it took for them to do what they did for me, and really loving it. But I guess more about myself. I kind of always liked really technical things, like the science of stuff. I was the guy who, hey, this kind of looks interesting. I'm going to take it apart and try to put it back together just to see. I want to see what this looks like on the inside, right? And that kind of turned into a whole bunch of things. But I was also the person that as soon as it got easy, it was no longer fun, right? I'd get bored with it, which turned into like how I was at school. I was mostly disengaged. I got good grades, but as I did well, that means I had to do less. So I didn't really have that discipline. I did the minimal it took to get what I needed to do, right? Like, hey, this is all I need to do to get the A. All right, man, done. I'm not doing the extra. I don't care, right? I want to have more time to have fun and go do fun stuff. But I also stuck to my comfort zone, right? I played sports and all that, but there was not too many times that I deliberately reached out to do something that seemed like, I'm not sure that I'd like that. I wouldn't just try it. It was difficult for me to start building towards goals that I couldn't foresee the end to, right? So leading through high school, going into my senior year, that's usually the year where you're trying to make sure you got plans for college or do whatever. And I made zero use of all my downtime. I knew that I wanted to do something, right? Yeah. I knew where some of my interests were, which were mostly like electronics. I was really big into computers and doing computer science stuff. But I didn't know what job I wanted, right? I knew, you got it in your head. I have to go to college. I have to get an education. I have to do well. And, my family, we lived modestly. We weren't like super rich or anything. And we weren't, dead broke poor. But I also didn't have a bunch of money saved up so I could just pay for college. So I needed to use my grades to get scholarships in order to get into college. Well, I applied for 0 scholarships. I applied to 0 colleges. I really didn't plan. And the reason I didn't plan to go to college is because I couldn't make a decision on what job I wanted, right? And I thought forward, like, okay, I don't want to go to college for a career that I don't even know that I want. Yeah. And I didn't want to do like, hey, let me do 2 years of this coursework, figure out that I don't even like the coursework. Now I've wasted 2 years, probably thousands of dollars, and I'm exactly where I was 2 years prior, and in debt. So I thought to myself, I was like, why apply for these scholarships? Why put forth all this effort if I can't see the goal at the end? So at the end of the day, I knew I wanted 3 things. I wanted an education. I wanted to have some experience, and I wanted to learn a skill, right? I needed to set myself up for success one way or another. And the military seemed like a good option. And, when I looked at that, I was like, okay, of all the branches, I'm going Air Force. If I'm doing this at all, it's Air Force.
What made you pick Air Force over the other ones?
So my two of my uncles were back in the day, Vietnam War. They were Army. One was a reservist, and the other was active. So they did their time. They got deployed out there. They didn't have good stories about the Army. So I didn't feel like the Marines were going to be much better. And I wanted to spend, as much as I love being on the water, being from Louisiana, yeah, put me on a boat. I can go fishing and have a good time. But I didn't want to be stationed on a ship. So the Navy was kind of out. So they all just kind of started eliminating each other. Yeah. I was like, all right, Air Force seems like a good choice. Very technical, very college oriented, to where I can do some of the things and have a good experience. So I got with the delayed enlistment program, did the ASVAB, did all that stuff. I did well. They offered me just about any job I wanted. And I just knew, I also didn't know what job I wanted in the Air Force. The recruiter tried to take me to Keesler because that was close by to kind of like visit a base. But I still wasn't sold on any particular career field. And I didn't do a ton of research. I was just like, let's see where this goes. Kind of like we talked about at the beginning of this. I was kind of like, hey, let's go with the flow, see where it takes me. So I came in at open electrical. And I initially told my parents, I was like, look, my goal is to get my degree, get that experience, learn a new skill, right? And then I want to come back. I want to come back to Louisiana. I want to be around family. So I was the 4 years and out guy. Of course, the recruiter went ahead and was like, hey, so you do 6 years, you could get A1C earlier.
It's a big deal at that time too.
That's a big deal. Well, and this is where it kind of got me too, because whether you do 4 or 6, you're kind of on the hook for 8 because they can get you for the reserve time, right? And I was like, look, if you got me on the hook for 8, no matter what, I might as well get paid for 6.
Yeah.
That's kind of where my teenage brain went. I was like, screw it. I'll get a promotion early. Sure, why not? So I was like, Mom, look, I promise 6 years and I'm done. Look, I want to get my degree. I want to go have some fun with the military. And then I'm coming back home. Promise. You could see where this story is going about how I was a liar. So a great commander I had, he mentioned this once, and this was during the COVID time. And it sticks with me because it's kind of funny because it's relevant. But with COVID, it would change on a dime. As soon as you get some new information on, hey, here's some new guidance that you have to follow. And then you have to brief it to your guys on like, hey, this is what's going to change for you. Mm-hmm. Well, in that moment, it already changed. So he would say like, hey, I didn't lie to you. The truth changed. Ooh. So anyway, back on track. So, I went in after basic, kind of got picked up to be a CE electrician. And at the time, I was like, I don't even know what this job is. Guess we're going to go to tech school and find out, and I'm thinking I'm going to learn all this stuff about electrical. And then day one, they hand you some hooks. Pretty much, they're called gaffs, right? They strap to your boots so you can climb a utility pole. And I'm like, wait. What are we doing again? But it was a great experience. Like it was something that I never thought I'd end up doing, but I had a lot of fun. And going through basic and tech school, I really learned to like embrace being a part of something that was bigger than myself. So I started getting hooked, right? And going into tech school, I really wanted to embrace the challenge and do well. I was like, look, I'm here, I'm committed. It's not worth dragging my feet. I need to just do the thing.
Where was your tech school?
Shepherd Air Force Base.
Shepherd, okay.
Yeah, and at the time, my tech school was 8 months long. And now I think it's only like 3.5, something like that.
That's what mine was. I think mine was 3.
So, yeah, ended up doing 8 months at Shepherd. That's a tour of duty right there. But anyway, Yeah, so I really took pride in trying to do well. I ended up being top of my class by the time we graduated, um, and that kept me motivated, kept me dug in because I really wanted to learn all the things because they tell you right when you're an airman what's your number one job, and I tell my guys this all the time is when you're an airman brand new, your number one job is to know your job, right? Everything else is after. Um, so it kind of started there, but it made me want to try harder because, and it was so much different from when I was in high school. In high school, okay, if I show up and I get a passing grade, sweet, leave me alone,
Yeah.
right? Uh, and then fast forward, a year, and I'm in tech training, and I am studying, I am trying hard, I am like, if I miss one answer on the test, I'm pissed off at myself.
Yeah.
Right. And then that turns into like, hey, let me help coach some of these guys that are having trouble, right? Really trying to dig in. Um, so yeah, that was kind of tech school for me. And then just starting to build those new relationships. Um, and as much as that fed in, I really thought that me personally demonstrating that proficiency would be valued more. Um, but it kind of ended up becoming an issue, right? So by the time I got to my first base, which was Holloman Air Force Base, um, and something comes up, and you want to step up and be like, hey, let me prove I'm the expert. Let me
Yeah.
show that I'm
Show
I
your
know
worth.
I know how to do this. I want to do it, right? Blah, blah, blah. Or someone's having trouble with it. Well, you want to like not necessarily push them out of the way, but like, hey, let me try to coach you up, right? Let me do the thing. Um, Now that's how I thought I was doing it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And having gotten feedback afterwards, right? And at the time it was upsetting, but now I can look back at it and see that it was value added. Uh, it was kind of seen as negative. Like I appeared to them as a know-it-all, like a person who just
Yeah.
wanted to be right all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that was never my intent. My intent was just like, hey, not only do I want to prove my own self-worth, right? And show that I know what I'm doing and I'm worthy, but I want to help others that are having trouble. Problem is the way I was approaching it, the way I was doing it, the
Delivery.
words that I said, right? Um, it wasn't communicating the intent that I had, right? But it took me years to figure out that like that's what I was doing.
So you mentioned you came in, you got promised that A1C, which for our listeners out there, especially non-military, when a recruiter is telling you that, that's a big deal. I remember mine told me I was going to be an A1C, and I went back and was talking to my Air Force friends, and I'm like, they promised me I'm going to be an Airman first class when I get there. That's pretty big. And they were like, okay, good job. But yeah, when you were talking about the feedback piece, when do you think it clicked with you to where you started to become more receptive to feedback?
Man, it probably wasn't until I was an NCO.
Really?
Yeah. Now I was fortunate, I made staff sergeant first time. And I had some of my own reasons for that. So, uh, you know, you start growing up, you see everybody around you. When you're a senior airman, and I honestly believe senior airmen are the hardest working guys we got
Oh
in
yeah.
all the Air Force.
Yeah.
You're right there on the cusp of being a staff sergeant, but you're not an NCO yet. So less authority, but you do all the dirty work. So thank you to all you out there who are a senior airman. Stay strong. But it was one of those situations where you got guys that make staff, and they start making decisions, and you're like, I'm not sure I quite agree with what you're trying to tell me to do. But I knew I had to do what they were asking, right? I tried to be a good team player, even though I was the cynic. I was super sarcastic about most things, and it was just kind of my attitude. But I looked at it as like, okay, so I can't tell you no, and you're not listening to me when I try to give you my ideas. So I just need to make rank to where I'm in your position now. And I can help make decisions that are better for the airmen because what you're doing is not right. So that was kind of one of my motivating things on like, I want to make staff so that I don't have to listen to your nonsense anymore.
Yeah.
Right. So that was me just trying to become the change itself.
Yeah, that's a big. I remember having the same mentality too. You just, like they say, shut up in color, and you're like, ooh, and it is my turn. I'm gonna have a difference of opinion on. I'll have a voice
Right.
at that point.
Right. But I was still the type that was like questioning most things, which was not necessarily right because even though I was a team player, I felt like I lacked self-awareness on how I was carrying myself. But I was fortunate to have really good mentors over the years, different levels, not always necessarily a supervisor, who kind of coached me up, carried me along the way. And because you have to have trust with the people first. And I think that's one thing that hurt me is some of the people that tried to give me feedback in the beginning. I'm not sure I had the relationship first to where I trusted their feedback.
Yeah.
Right. And part of me, I think, was the ego is I didn't want to believe it because I couldn't see it in myself. I thought I was doing well. Right. It's our own dumb minds that we're fighting against.
And plus, too, it's the relationship in general with that person. If I've had supervisors before that didn't put any energy at all into having a relationship with me, and they try to tell you something you got to work on. But if it's someone that you're closer to, you take that feedback. So I think that's one of the biggest things I've taught people that I've interacted with. What do you think was the biggest change from you from being an NCO to a senior NCO?
Perspective.
Okay.
And thinking deeper into the things like as an NCO, you're more narrow-minded on the tactical. You really are. You, as much as you think you want to think about the third and fourth course actions that might come from something, you're not. Becoming a senior NCO and becoming more open-minded and thinking about the bigger picture, really like a system of systems kind of thing. Which, by the way, if anybody wants to get into like systems thinking, look that up. That will open your mind on understanding big picture stuff. Lots of great books on that. But yeah, I think, and you can't compare that experience. You can't compare the experience level of a staff sergeant to the experience level of a senior NCO. Just the years of struggle and change and doing all the things. It builds into that.
I hate this question. I do, but I think it's really good for what we're doing.
What you're about to ask me anyway.
Well, someone told me one time, they said, anytime you go to any sort of panel, whether it's a Chiefs panel and watch, they'll do this with you. But the first question someone always asks is, what's the toughest challenge you've ever had to encounter in your career? And what did you do to overcome it? So what's the toughest obstacle you've ever had in your career? And how did you face that? See how I ask it a little different.
Myself.
Your mindset.
Right. And there's so many times that like I was my biggest obstacle. Right. And there's times when, like I said, looking back and doing that self-reflection and timing is important with that is, pick an event, it happens. You view it as whatever your perspective and what you do to deal with that, whether positive or negative, is going to be what drives a lot of things.
Yeah.
There was a situation at plenty bases, but I will say, where I was put into a position where I felt like I was being pigeonholed. I wasn't being supported. I was the guy they were putting in the corner because they wanted to promote somebody else, right? And it's really easy to just sink that in and believe the world is against you and you've got a toxic environment and all these other things and nobody cares about me but me. But what you end up having to take from that is like, but you can still do great things, right? And just because you're in an uncomfortable place doesn't mean that you're in the wrong place. And taking the time to let it simmer and think through it, go ahead, take your negative moment, take a few days or a week or whatever and just kind of like stew about it. Figure out, find something good in it, right? Find something that's going to drive you and then just go.
Yeah.
Right. A few of those situations, I've been one of those where, okay, so senior NCOs, a lot of times it's just master sergeants and probably around the tech sergeant level and sometimes staffs. They get really hooked on duty titles. Something about like, hey, my duty title has to say this to be promoted.
Has NCOIC in front of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. People make stuff up. It's funny and sad at the same time.
I've seen it. Yep.
But I've also been there. Right. Where like, oh, and then somebody else is in like a section chief or an element lead position. Right. And somehow that duty title, but we could all collectively agree that a title doesn't make you a leader. Right. It's strange that we can all know that this is a thing, but they all secretly desire it, even outwardly desire it, right? Like, I need to do this. But it's not so much what your duty is, it's what you do with it, right? What responsibility have you been given? And then how are you operating exceptionally, right? So I really dove into the whole like grow where you're planted thing and turn that into more of a mindset. Like building a growth mindset was really important to me. And some of that took time, right? There was times when I was definitely pissed off. There was, while I was at Davis Monthan Air Force Base, right? So I got there as a tech, ended up making master, and I can't remember. I was probably a little over a year as a master sergeant, still trying to figure out stuff, right? But you have those mentalities, and this was the time when deployments were really big, and they were starting to do the big chunks, right? Like a 60-40 split.
What year was this?
I got to Davis Monthan, I think September of 12.
Okay. I left in early 13. We were there at the same time.
Oh, man.
We could have got breakfast burritos.
Yeah. We might have passed each other.
Probably did. Yeah.
stood in line behind you at a taco stand.
Say Eegee's? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Right outside the gate.
Yeah, man. That's where everybody went for all the goodies.
The slushies and stuff they had?
God, so good. Now I want one. So, yeah, but... so we were in a moment where the majority of the squadron was deployed, right? To include the chief. So our senior stepped up to sit in the chief billet. We had very few master sergeants around. A good bit of them were in what you can consider as like section chief, superintendent type positions, right? And here I was, like, pretty much the only master sergeant who was a shop NCOIC. And I'm thinking, well, why am I not being given this opportunity? Why am I not in that position to do those things? So I was like, okay, so I kind of have less responsibility, but I could still do a lot of great things with what's been given to me. So rather than focus on what I don't have, I put a lot of effort into what I did have.
Yeah.
And I had a shop that really needed leadership. So I fed into them. Our shop started winning a ton of awards. We were doing a lot of awesome things. And because I had some really great NCOs, it gave me a little bit of float time. So I started backing up the first sergeant and doing a few other different things. And because I did that, I ended up being the only senior NCO who stratted that year out of that squadron.
Wow.
And again, with an NCOIC title, right? My job was to run a shop of 35 people, right? About 7 civilians and the rest military. Um, and yeah, did super well, right? And that was one of those moments that was like, it was a kind of a crucible, but it also proved the point of grow where your planet works.
Yeah.
And I use that as an example when I try to get guys to get off that on like, oh, I need to be in this position. No, you don't. You just need to take advantage of the position you're in. But that moment, that as soon as they did that to me, fighting through that was a hard lesson for me.
Yeah. Yeah. You brought up something when you started with this, and you were talking about it's not the duty title, it's what you do with it. And John Levittow Jr. was talking about that on episode 5 of the Shadows podcast in the archives. But he was talking about how people win the Levittow Award, for example. They're not defined by winning that. It's what you do with that award after the fact. He's like, that's just a launching pad. It's what you actually do with it after that. And you also spoke about in between that, EGs and the achievements. What do you think for you personally or professionally has been the biggest achievement that you've obtained since you've been in the military?
Honestly, my biggest achievement is the things that I've been able to help others do, right? Me feeding into them and investing in them and watching that growth of amazing potential come out. That's been the most rewarding leadership experience that I have. It has none of my accomplishments, or I should say all of my accomplishments pale in comparison to what I feel from that energy return on, because you never know the length at which it'll go, right? You help one person and they help two or whatever. Like this could be years later, and I've had airmen reach out to me and like, hey, back in whatever day, you did this for me. And I took that and I've been able to do this since then. And holy hell, like you never know the extent.
Isn't that crazy?
And I gained so much from it. It just makes me want to do it more. That's why I really love getting out amongst the airmen and trying to feed into them as much as I can. Because that's what I would call my most amazing experience. My most remarkable accomplishment is being able to just help them do amazing things, becoming their best self.
A great leader's best accomplishments never get typed onto their bio. How have you been able to balance personal and professional life? Because military career is tough with families. How have you been able to balance that?
Really poorly, to be honest. So especially in the beginning of the career, I was dug in to do so many things. I was trying to do all the things. And you start sacrificing family time and taking it too much for granted. You come home and your wife's like, oh, it's okay, you can go do this, or it's okay, you can go do this. And you don't realize what they're really giving to you, right? Or what you're robbing of yourself. And then only to be mad about it later, right? And you start building those really bad habits. Those kind of came to a head, and I really realized how much I was doing it by the time I was a master sergeant, right? So, after I left Holloman wasn't too bad. I had a good back and forth. I spent a good bit of time with my wife, and I don't have any children. So there wasn't that other commitment, I would say. Yeah. And so I guess it became easier to take that for granted because my wife was so willing to let me do things, right? But yeah, so I went to my second base, which was Tyndall, and I was assigned to a unit where we did a lot of TDYs. So we were TDY probably better than 200 days out of the year on average. But it was like, hey, go out for a week, you're going to come back. Go out for like 2 weeks, you're going to come back. Go out for a month. Like you never really knew how long you were going to be gone for. And you also never knew how long you're going to be back for. So it came really hard to plan things and do any actually, I mean, hell, I had one, and we have small teams, right? Like 2 people, maybe 3. I ended up driving down, I think we were at MacDill Air Force Base. And so not too far from Tyndall, right? Um, and we finished all our briefings and we did our out brief with that command team after we did our work for the week. And we're at the gas station and I'm calling my foreman. I'm like, hey, by the way, we're on our way back. This is Friday, right? I figure, hey, we'll make it back tonight. I'll have the weekend, right? And then whatever goes on next week, maybe take leave, what have you. And he tells me on the phone right there, hey, by the way, when you get home, don't unpack your bag. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's like, well, on Monday, we need you and the guy you're with to head out, and gave us they already had another TDY set for us.
Jeez.
Right. In the opposite direction. So I think that time we ended up driving to Cape Cod, maybe.
How did that go over when you got home?
Oh, not good.
Yeah. Not
good. It was like, why? Pretty much my wife was like, why'd you even come home? You should have just drove straight through.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of tensions. That entire assignment was really hard on family life because it was so unpredictable.
What about?
I would say it was also really fun to go do all the TDYs and travel a lot. Like we went all kinds of crazy places. Some of the funnest TDYs and some of the most rewarding work I've been able to do. And as far as on a technical aspect, as like an NCO, man, the challenge to do some of the things that we got to do, that was a lot of growth for me, but at a serious cost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think a lot of listeners, especially non-military listeners, can relate to it a lot, but the stress it has of deployments and TDYs and
to be honest, deployments, between my wife and I, deployments almost became easier. So that assignment was so tough because, okay, a deployment, right? Okay. You get told on this day, you're going to leave to whatever country.
You could plan it. Yeah.
Right. Not only do I know I'm leaving, I have a return date.
Mm-hmm.
And when I return, you can't touch me for X amount of time.
Yeah.
Right. I get R&R on the back end. Like you could plan things. This was like, hey, 2 weeks from now, you're leaving for 3 weeks.
Okay, you're on call basically.
Right. And there was times when we're on the road for like, base X for 2 weeks. And the call comes in like, hey, when y'all are done there, instead of coming back, why don't you go over to this base as well? Since you're already there, you're like close to it. Just, add on to the trip.
Yeah.
So because it was so unpredictable, it made it tougher.
Yeah. Yeah.
I did that for 4 years.
Ooh. I know when I go back, I've been in a developmental special duty position for twice back to back. And I've been non-deployable during those. It'll be a total of 6 years. So I know when I go back to COM, I'm going to be right there on the chopping block to get deployed. I already know it. Like we're already planning that. So
yeah. But there was a ton of great lessons that came from.
You learn a lot.
That short stint, I say short, but it was 4 years, between all the jobs and everything like that. Mm-hmm. I'd even say like, that's really where I learned about, owning failure, but sharing the successes. Right. Yeah. So we had a really small team, only 8 guys. It was 2 civilians and the rest were military. And we'd usually go out in teams of 2. Right. So at some point in time, I'm the NCOIC of the shop as a young tech sergeant. And if I'm out at a base, me and somebody else, and I got 2 other people at another base and 2 other people at another base, something bad happens at one of those other bases.
Yeah.
Who's responsible?
Yeah.
Right. So I took that as me. I took that as me is that like, hey, I got to be the umbrella. And the other thing was, I guess, it was a hard lesson because sometimes it happened, and when bad something happens and you get the phone call like, hey, by the way, this happened. What's up? Why did you guys screw up so much? How did you let this happen? And you want to be mad at them, right? You want to be mad at them, but I had to learn to go like, okay, well, I know it sounds weird to like just say, well, blame myself. But the way I looked at it was, one way or another, I turned accountability to, well, did we resource the team correctly? Did they have everything they need? Did they have all the training that was needed to do it? Uh, did we, was the team composition right or wrong? Right? Did
Yeah.
we fail in the trip planning phase of this? So it was all these things where, and that's really where I turned it into a routine of, okay, I got it. Failure is going to happen.
Yeah.
Number one, accept that it happened. Because dwelling on it's not going to do you any good. But as soon as you accept that it happened, you can start learning from what you did or didn't do. And then make that promise, make that commitment of this will never happen again.
Yeah.
We might fail again, but not like this.
Yeah. Yep. And another thing I've noticed too about hearing a lot of your story is, you're currently a chief master sergeant in the Air Force. You're still very motivated. What is it that has kept that fire burning for that long with you?
It's probably, not to sound corny or anything, but like it goes back to the reason that I even wanted to attain this rank to begin with. And that kind of goes back to the beginning of the story, right? Because what you didn't ask me is how did I go from 6 years and out to now I'm past 18?
Yeah.
Right. So the camaraderie stuck in, being part of something that was bigger than myself, wanting to do more, and meeting some great mentors along the way. And, one of those happened to be the first command chief that I ever really put eyes on, which was at Holloman Air Force Base. And if he's ever out there listening, Bruce the Bulldog Barton, excellent command chief, ended up in his office one time. And this was because I was part of the Airman's Council. And that's a funny story in itself. But he really taught a lesson about how it's not about me, right? And I internalized that it wasn't about me. And in that, along with some other things like we talked about, like wanting to help make change so that things are better, right? I understood that as like the rank structure goes up, like, okay, you become an NCO, you're more of a leader, right? Or you're in a leadership position, let's say, and you have some influence over a small group of airmen. Yeah, typically it's like a handful, like, yeah, 5 maybe, as a staff sergeant. Well, you could do your best to control their environment and try to make it better for them, and help grow them into being great leaders. But I also saw that if I want to expand that, I need to have greater position. So as a tech, okay, maybe now it's like 20 or 30 folks. As a master sergeant, maybe it's 50 or 60 folks, and on up, right? It starts just exponentially growing. And I saw that as I moved up, my circle of influence grew. And my ability to affect positive change grew. And just my drive for wanting to do that is kind of what keeps me going. And like we said, like the energy I get as a return on investment when I invest in those airmen now keeps me excited, man. Like I love doing it.
And that's such a good feeling too. When you, like you mentioned earlier, you hear back from someone and something you may not even know that you did. And I think I reached out to someone from Davis Mothin and I told them, hey, thank you for such and such. And they were like, I'm so glad to hear from you, but I don't even remember doing that. But okay, wow. And I know that had to be a rewarding feeling, hearing that as well. Sorry, I had my ring light attracted this pterodactyl sized mosquito that came in here. And as you're sitting there talking to me, for those of you that cannot see, I'm sitting here like swatting this thing away. But yeah. So speaking about the motivation piece, talk to our listeners about your weekly motivations that you have.
Oh yeah. So I started up a weekly email. I send it out every Monday. I call it Motivation Monday. And it's pretty much a short story related to a quote. And I'll break that down a little bit on how it started. So I ended up getting an office that had a whiteboard in it. Well, I wasn't sure what I wanted to put on the whiteboard, but I thought at least something that would motivate me throughout the week, that would keep me going, is some motivational quote or whatever that I could look at every day and remind me of like why I'm doing whatever, right? We've all seen all the motivational quote stuff. Some of them we tie to, but whatever. But as I started doing this, Airmen coming by my office would see it, and then it always tended to drive a conversation.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes the conversations get deep. Sometimes it's like, hey, that's a really great quote. I like that. And they leave the office. And so I ended up coming to Ramstein, and at Ramstein, I've got a very large organization, right? It's over 300 military. And if you count all the civilians, it's upwards of 700, right?
Decent size. Yeah.
Yeah. So I knew that I'll never reach them all. And the conversations are not as likely to happen for me to get around to every single airman and like, hey, how you doing? Right.
Mm-hmm.
As many times as I try to get away from the desk, I understand that it's too big. But I wanted to invite them to be part of that conversation. But I also didn't want to just be shooting out quotes like I'm using email for Instagram, right?
Yeah.
Right. Like, hey, here's this awesome quote that I found. I wanted to start the conversation with it.
Yeah.
So what I did and it became kind of like my weekly meditation, right? When I'm at the end of my week, when I'm going through my own motions and getting ready for the next week, you kind of reflect on things. And I track a bunch of stuff on different Facebook pages, Instagram, other groups that post motivational quotes. Mm-hmm. Or sometimes just reading a book, something sticks out to me like, ooh, this one sparked some interest for me. So I pull that out and my initial thoughts about it, right? So I'll put some stuff, but the overall goal is to create a conversation. So usually, number one, I try to keep it short. I want this easily digestible. If somebody's going to read it, it's like less than 250 words, right? Sometimes it goes over, but that's okay. Yeah. And I'll put in there something relevant. I always want these things to be relevant and meaningful for them, that they can also, it's not just, hey, here's a quote. It's like, hey, here's how you could potentially interpret this, right? And how it's immediately applicable to your daily life, either personally or professionally. Sometimes I tie it to something that happened recently. All right. The last one I talked about, the one that went out this past Monday, you read it. I included something about Juneteenth and how hard change is. And that was matched with a quote about being a change agent. Right. And usually what I try to do is like, hey, here's like a prelim of something to think about, something that's current and relevant. Here's the quote. And here's like the initial thoughts on a discussion on how it's applicable to you. And then I usually try to include some thought-provoking questions that they can either internalize or discuss with their fellow airmen. And, so I started it this year in 2021. I've been able to hit every single Monday up to now. So keeping the streak alive. And to be honest, at first I was like, I don't know. I don't even know who's going to read this. Hey, it's another email from the chief, delete. And I instantly started getting replies, emails from all ranks, man, like airman up to, chief master sergeant. Like actually, I'll add in, there's a few people, officers that they caught wind of it and they were like, add me to this. Wow. So I'm like, okay. So I now have like some subscribers, I guess, people that have, been like, I want more of these. And every now and then I'll have people reach back and go like, hey, this one actually really helped me. Or, the timing gets weird. Sometimes I'll send them out right? Because I picked these randomly, kind of. But I'll have somebody reach back and go like, "Man, we just had a conversation about this. This is amazing. I don't even know like, and these questions are perfect, or this is I'm going to use this as the next discussion we have in the shop or whatever." And I'm
Nice.
like, hell, I had an airman tell me that like he gets excited about showing up to work Monday morning because he knows that's going to be there.
That's
I was like,
awesome.
well, shit, now I can't not write it.
Yeah.
Um,
Now you're in
but
too deep.
right. And I've had some people say, like, man, if you had to, you could probably stop doing those. I was like, well, I feel like I can't. But the other thing is I don't feel like it's costing me anything. So
As
like
long as
I've
it
added it.
impacts one person.
Well, yeah. But I've added as part of my routine, when I'm kind of relaxing on a Sunday and I'm
Mm-hmm.
just like, okay, I do like my little meditation and I'm trying to think through my week or whatever. And that thought hits my mind this is, even if you just scan through a list of quotes or you were reading a book and something just pops to you. And all I think is like, okay, man, if I was going to have a discussion with an airman about how this idea is relevant to them, what would I
Yeah.
say? Type it all up, stare at it for a minute. Cool, good to go. It doesn't take me too long to do it, so I don't feel like it's not a burden, I would say.
Yeah.
And I get excited to do it because of what I know it does, even like for one person.
Yeah. And I became a subscriber a couple of weeks back and actually went in on Monday for a little bit. And I was going through my emails and I saw that it had popped up and I was like, oh, I was like, hey, I get to read this. And it was definitely worth the read. I think they're amazing. And you've kind of transitioned from that into you're up there at celebrity status now because you've appeared on some podcasts. You're actually you're kind of a big deal now, and you have you're co-author of the Firestarters book project with Shay Sparks, Joe Bogdan, some people who have been here on the podcast as well. So talk to us about the Firestarters book project.
Man, so you definitely mentioned some celebrities. So I got wrapped into that, and that was an interesting story. So pretty much what happened is I heard Shay because I listened to Joe Bogdan's podcast, the Llama Lounge, and he had Shay on there, and she was talking about supporting veterans
Mm-hmm.
with PTSD and a few other things. I think she mentioned Bunker Labs
Yeah, Bunker Labs. Yeah.
specifically. And I was like, okay, because I do a lot of like support with Society of American Military Engineers for veteran transition and veteran support. Um, and I was like, I want you on board with how you can maybe help out the Society of American Military Engineers and see where I can maybe fit in to help you with things that you're doing. And that's how I ended up on her podcast. Um, and then, power of networking, right? And then as time went on and we got to know each other a little bit better, the idea, she reached out to me and was like, what do you think? We're doing this Firestarters book project. What do you think? And I was like, this is awesome. And the whole premise of it is being that spark of change
Mm-hmm.
that inspires other people to do change, right? That like you create hope, right? And the sense that, one match can light another, can light another, can light another, right? And you just keep that going for exponential growth. So we collaborated, and it's pretty much a collection of short stories.
Yeah.
So each of the 8 authors all joined in, and we all have like a personal reflection story on what we did in the moment of being able to be that spark of change, right? And like, hey, this is what I struggled with. This is what I did. This is what I learned. Um, and just being able to be part of that with a group of absolute professionals from everywhere is and getting to meet them and network with them that I can't put a price on it. I can't.
It's a star-studded group of people.
And So that's been exciting. And to now even be like, I can say like, hey, I'm a published author. That's weird.
Yeah.
Never thought I'd do that. Dude, when I was in high school and even starting to work through college, like towards the end of my college years, I was getting much better at it. But writing, I'm not a writer.
Yeah.
Right. If you talk to high school me, he'd laugh at you. Hey, you're going to publish a book one day. Be like, wrong.
Nerd.
Right. Get out of here. Yeah, so now that's a thing. And it's outstanding. And I can't wait. You know, I've had so many people reach out to me and like, when can I buy this? I need a signed copy. I was like, okay.
Speaking of which, and hopefully they're listening to this, but you know, I speak very highly of Shay Sparks, and Joe Bogdan is one of my mentors in life. Can you believe that I haven't even got a copy yet from either of them? And Shay actually like dangled one in front of us. She came down and was like, look, here's the book, and handed it to us. And it was like, okay, give it back. And still hadn't had a chance to crack it open, but
hold on. To be fair, so the copy she was holding was a proof copy for the authors to review to make sure that nothing else was screwed up. And we've only just recently been able to order and ship them out to even ourselves so that we can start distributing them to people that want them.
Okay, if she gives me one or Bogdan gives me, if they gift me one before this is recorded, I cut this whole piece out. If not, I still don't have a copy. Okay. So I'll call them out on it. So what do you ultimately want to be known for at the end of the day?
If I had to say like a legacy, I'd like somebody to say that I helped them grow, that I gave them the tools they needed to become the best version of themselves. That's something I helped them with, inspired them to have that own spark of hope for themselves and reach their potential.
I like it. What final comments do you have for our listeners?
Hey guys, number one, thanks for listening. There's a ton of great information. We listed so much stuff. This story goes so deep. I've got so many other lessons learned. And I'm sure if you ask any senior enlisted leader, hey, what are some of the tough lessons you learned? How much time you got? Lots of growth over time, but I'd have to say the biggest takeaway is it starts with your mindset. It starts with you. Learn self-awareness and learn how to learn from your own mistakes, right? Accept that some failure happened, but know that you're probably the only person holding you back, or you're your biggest obstacle, right? And don't be afraid to reach out for help when you feel like there's no other way out. So, and never stop learning. Never stop learning. Those are some of the hard things that I had. It took me time to pick up, years of struggles. So.
And if our audience would like to find out more info about you and all the amazing things you are doing, where could you point them to?
So if you're in the Air Force and you want to find me on the email global, I'm really easy to find. First dot last name, adam.boubede@us.af.mil. I'm the only one. And if you want, you can find me on Facebook. I'm listed under my own name. Same on LinkedIn. So I'm happy to hear from you, answer any more questions, join you on your own podcast if you got one. In fact, Caleb invited me out, so we're trying to set that up too. But yeah, happy to be of service.
I definitely listen. If you can get you on season 2 of Ignite, that would be phenomenal. That'd be a really good episode. Well, I enjoyed this. I definitely think there's a lot more meat on the bone. I think we got to get you back for another episode. Once I get a copy of Firestarters, once I get a copy and read that, we'll definitely plan on having you come back on here and go over a lot more of those lessons learned. But folks, that is all the time we're going to have for this week's episode of the Shadows Podcast.